Thank you very much, Chris. I am deeply impressed with your introduction. I think it's a little poetic exaggeration. However, I'm working hard to deserve it, at least in part. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for paying attention to my address, which is available in printed form. If you haven't got your copy, it will get around to you. Let me get started right away because we are running behind schedule. The town of Chartres in France boasts one of the finest and earliest examples of Gothic cathedrals. Its stained glass windows are the object of pilgrimage from the world over. The admiring pilgrims look at them in awe, discovering how their glow changes with the journey of the sun across the sky. Words just cannot do justice to the deep burning blue, burgundy, and purple, among many other colors that must be seen to be believed. Nor can they be matched, try as you may, with today's technology. The art of making stained glass windows as practiced in Chartres is a lost art. For several generations, its formula was handed down from father to son. But when the last member of the family died, he took the secret of blending these exquisite colors to the grave with him. There was many an attempt to rediscover the lost secret. After all, chemistry, physics, and other supporting sciences are at a much higher level now than they were in the Middle Ages. To no avail. The glassmakers of Chartres knew something that put their windows beyond the proudest achievements of modern science and art. I want to sound the alarm. The art of the gold standard may go the way of the art of making stained glass windows. Calling the gold standard an art is no exaggeration. It achieves as high a degree of harmony in the affairs of man as any other art form, in addition to being a pillar of economic science. It achieves as high a degree. Now, this art and science is endangered. When my generation leaves the stage, the gold standard will be expunged from living memory. Young people will only know what government-controlled schools will let them about the golden age of the gold standard. These governments like to pose as the champions of preserving our intellectual heritage. That may be, except when it comes to the gold standard, which they treat as you would alchemy or astrology. They say that we should be thankful that we have been delivered from this barbarous relic. We must look at it with a sense of shame. The gold standard sprang from superstition. We don't want to be reminded of the fact that our ancestors fell under its spell. Their example could be contagious. We should cherish our progressive paper money system that has freed us from the slavery of superstition. Yet, it is this way of looking at the gold standard that is backward, not the gold standard itself. It is the paper standard that is based on ignorance, not the gold standard. It is the paper standard that has enslaved producers and savers, not the gold standard. It was the destruction of the gold standard by the governments that caused the Great Depression of the 1930s, not the gold standard. There is no reason to be ashamed of our monetary heritage and to disown its greatest protagonists and practitioners, the schoolmen, Sir Isaac Newton, Adam Smith, among others. We should try and pick up the pieces before they fall into oblivion. As Mr. Ferdinand Lipp's book so admirably proves, governments have been waging gold wars for centuries. They have declared victory over gold, and they appear to have silenced all critics of their paper money system, in spite of overwhelming historical and logical evidence showing its fallibility. The skirmishes of the Gold War that may still go on are unimportant, as academia and media in fealty to the government suggest. The important thing, according to these sycophants, is that there is no alternative available for the money created on the strength of the authority of the government, the source of all blessings to society. The gold standard has been thoroughly discredited by events in the 20th century, they say, in particular by the horrible unemployment it brought about. The truth, however, is that the gold wars are still raging on. It is manifested by the various forms of suppressing the price of gold clandestinely. Gotha can take credit for fighting back, demanding transparency and full disclosure of government involvement in the gold markets. This is the first front in the gold wars. But there is a second front as well, although it's not so widely recognized. Governments and their central banks are engaged in subverting the history and the economics of gold. It is a propaganda war. The central banks spend unlimited amounts of public money to subsidize so-called research to discredit the gold standard and to suppress evidence that the regime of irredeemable currency is bound to collapse. Their methodology is borrowed from Hitler. If lies are repeated often enough, and those courageous enough to expose them are taken care of through bribe, blackmail, or worse, then people will eventually accept lies as truth. The existence of this second front in the gold wars presents new challenges to Gotha. The war must be won on both fronts, or it cannot be won. The governments and their central banks have a very poor case. Nothing shows this more convincingly than the fact that the American establishment could never muster sufficient moral courage to amend the Constitution of the United States that explicitly calls for a metallic monetary standard. The establishment will rather live with the odium of running an unconstitutional monetary regime with a most miserable record. Irredeemable currency is an instrument of pauperizing people in other countries through trade wars. Currency devaluation is openly advocated as a legitimate policy means whereby one country can gain trade advantages over its competitors. But paper money increasingly becomes an instrument of the government to pauperize its own people. The best industrial jobs have been exported from America to Asia in response to the policy of currency debasement. The latest instance is the devaluation of the US dollar against the Chinese yuan. Please note that whatever the media says, they may call it revaluation or adjustment or this or that. The fact is that this was a devaluation of the US dollar, because China, as we heard at this conference already from several speakers, is going to be the world's largest economy. So when the US dollar loses value in terms of the Chinese currency, this is a devaluation of the US dollar. It can be safely predicted that this devaluation will make the position of the American producers weaker, not stronger. American trade deficits will keep growing by leaps and bounds. Why? The devaluation of the dollar against the yuan is a huge bonanza for the Chinese competitors of American business. Please do not be misled by official propaganda which says that devaluation is good for you because you can export more. This is an ephemeral effect. The long-term effect is just the opposite. You are making yourself weaker when you devalue. The Chinese can now buy more imported goods per unit of exports than before. By contrast, Americans can buy less. The terms of trade of America has deteriorated, while that of China has improved. The evaluation of the national currency is akin to self-mutilation. Champions don't do it before the race. Governments trying to compete in the world market shouldn't either. The solution to the problem of persistent trade deficits is not to be found in the manipulation of currency values. Quite to the contrary, it is to be found in their stabilization through an international gold standard. The new challenge to Goethe is educational. It should lead the fight against official disinformation about gold, just as it has for 6.5 years led the fight against official distortion of the value of gold. I have started a new series of articles under the title The Revisionist Theory and History of Money. I noted that it's incorporated in that booklet which was published for this conference. In the first article just released to celebrate the Gold Rush 21 conference, I show, and this is important because this is new, that the Great Depression and the worldwide unemployment in its wake was caused by the governments themselves. At the end of World War I, they did not allow the bill market to continue its pre-war function of acting as the clearinghouse for the international gold standard. Not only did this doom the gold standard, but less obviously, it destroyed the wage fund, out of which workers could be paid well in advance of the sale of goods to the final gold-paying consumer. Thereafter, it had to be cash and carry. But since there was not enough gold, I'm talking about the aftermath of World War I. But since there was not enough gold to finance the same volume of trade in goods without a proper clearing system, such as real bills, the gold standard had to break down. The causal relation from the expulsion of real bills to massive unemployment worldwide has escaped the attention of virtually every observer. After the wage fund was destroyed, the massive unemployment could only be alleviated if the government assumed responsibility for paying wages. This it did by creating the so-called welfare state, which paid workers for not working and farmers for not farming. If the governments had allowed the real bill circulation to return, as they should have, then there would have been no unemployment. Everyone eager to earn wages could have found employment in the consumer goods industry. There would have been no unsaleable surpluses either. It is as simple as that. Under a gold standard, consumption creates jobs, and jobs create the income with which to buy the goods, provided that the government does not sabotage the clearing system. There were political consequences as well. The popularity of totalitarianism, Nazi socialism, and Bolshevik communism was due in large part to the unattractiveness of the unemployment-ridden democracies. People who sought to escape totalitarianism in voting with their feet were turned away at the border, including shiploads of Jewish refugees who were not allowed on shore when their boat dropped anchor in America. There was no place for them underneath the sun because there were no jobs for them. With the bathwater of real bills, the governments threw out the baby of employment opportunities. The democratic governments are the culprit responsible for the longevity of totalitarianism. It was they that destroyed the wage fund, thereby causing worldwide unemployment. The borders had to be closed to refugees. Under the gold standard, people who were able and willing to work were always welcome. After the wage fund had been destroyed, the same people became unwanted. They were left to the tender mercies of totalitarian regimes where there was plenty of work for them in the forced labor camps. Had real bills been allowed to make a comeback, the pre-war conditions of employment and prosperity would have been restored quickly after the cessation of hostilities. Since more consumption creates more employment, if the clearing system is not sabotaged by the governments, the gates of immigration could have been kept wide open. The drab and neurotic way of life under the totalitarian regimes would have triggered a massive exodus of workers similar to the one from East to West Germany prior to the Berlin Wall. Totalitarian regimes would have been denied manpower and would have collapsed much sooner as a result. Many of you may know that I have started on the internet what I call Gold Standard University. It has been inactive for over a year now, and the reason is that I want to convert it to Gold Standard University Live with the help of my colleague and friend, Dr. Bill Kures of Missoula, Montana. Our inaugural session will take place in Missoula in the spring of 2006. I take this opportunity to urge Gata to engage governments in the second front in the gold wars as well. What better way to fire the opening salvo is there than endorsing Gold Standard University Live? And I'm very happy to refer to the message from Ferdy Lips, which we heard in the morning, that he is also working on this, and he's talking about Gold Monetary Institute worldwide. Well, of course, Gold Standard University would be very happy to be part of this network. And it's not married to Montana, although it's a lovely place. It could travel from country to country if it gets the invitation. And my closing sentence, let the truth about gold be told, and let the young generation have an opportunity to become familiar with it. Thank you very much.